Welcome everybody to another series of Under the Tin, where we are speaking to different stakeholders within the sport, different levels of the sport, aiming to get a different perspective of the challenges that we're facing in a post-COVID world. So I'm delighted today to be joined by founder of Interactive Squash, Markos Kern. So Markos, firstly, thank you so much for joining us. How are you? How are things in Germany?
Oh, thanks for having us. Things in Germany are good, we like to complain, so a lot of complaining going on. We're somewhere in the middle field, but we always feel like we're the last, but that's a very German thing. So generally everything's fine.
Good stuff. So, right, talk to me about your background and your journey into squash. First and foremost, you've created an unbelievable product that is hugely exciting. So, give us a bit of background about your journey and then how Interactive Squash came to be.
Well, I'm now in the squash world for about 5 years, and my background originally is completely something else. I grew up designing clubs all around the world, a lot of festivals, a lot of stages, then did a lot of brand related work for big brands, and always wanted to do something with a little bit more, let's say a little bit more purpose. So a couple of years ago, we okay, why can't we merge gaming and sports? Because obviously people are way too little active. And stumbled upon my first squash lesson with a friend in Dubai. I was on a layover and he was like, let's go play squash. And I was like, oh, why not? Loved the workout. He obviously made me run around like crazy and I completely lost it. But was very clear to me in the very beginning is the image needs to be nicer. It needs to be, because I really love the activity, but just the image that I had was but it's an old people sport, right? Which is a very German thing. And then I was like, this would be so much more fun if there's a big screen and fully interaction. And we just went for it, spent a couple of months and developed it. The very early version, which was completely crap, but then we moved on from there.
So how long has Interactive Squash been going now?
The first unit is actually about to be, so we started March 2016. It took us about 4 or 5 months to develop the first prototype. Then we launched it around June. And I think the first installation already went up in October, which was sort of the first prototype. And that's been running ever since. Shortly followed by Alphen in the Netherlands. So there's a couple of clubs around that already have it now. Yeah, almost 4 years. Time flies.
And so obviously we've seen interactive squash courts in action and the front wall in action on PSA and on Squash TV. But what do you feel like the general uptake's been like for you guys so far, and what's how receptive has the squash world been, and I guess what are some of the challenges that you've faced?
I mean, the challenge is also, we always refer to the challenge as also one of the biggest potentials in the sport. So obviously it is a very old-fashioned and old, a sport with an old mindset. So it's not naturally a sport where people say hey, we need to reinvent and let's adapt, change and be innovative. It was more that's the sport and that's great, and everybody needs to realize why we're so cool. So there was a lot of naysaying in the beginning. Everyone's yeah, why do you want to bring? Now we're seeing, if there wouldn't be COVID, we would have a lot of courts on it already. I think we're now approaching, I don't know the exact number, 60, something between 60 and 70 courts. Mm-hmm. The very beginning, just like any innovation scale, is you have the first early adopters. They're this is great. And then more and more people are coming. And now, since probably end of 2019, we see that the mindset is slowly shifting, because we have a lot of great cases out there, a lot of different kinds of clubs, from club membership clubs to pay for play to completely community center driven. And they're all doing well, and they're all using the systems in a really nice way. And it always leads to a much higher increase of playtime. So now more and more of the, let's call it the rather skeptical people are looking left and right and realizing, okay, this really seems to work. So we're very happy to see quite an increase of installations happening now.
Yeah, well, no, that's great. I'm sure it is only a matter of time. Having seen your presentation at the Squash Summit, it was wildly impressive, and I think it's it's what's needed, right? I mean, we're going to go on to this and talk about what the what the game needs to bounce back, and I think interactive squash can play a huge part in that. But let's take a step back from that right now. So where do you think the game of squash is right now at the moment, having come into it over the last 5 years? And what's your take on how the sport is doing on the whole, kind of irrespective of COVID? We know that's going to throw up some challenges.
Yeah, but that goes for every sport. I think so. Over the last 5 years, we've had a very, very, very deep insight. Like, we've been at a lot of events. We obviously speak with everybody in the whole ecosystem, from the trainers, from the players, the pro athletes, the PSA, the operators, the court installers. Like, all these people basically create this thing. And the one overarching thing that I would say is, like, everything's actually sort of in a ready state for success, but not really happening. It's like a little, that's why we always said it's like a sleeping giant, because you have this sheer amount of installed locations. You have a location which is a confined space. It's actually, if you look at it when compared with other sports, from revenue per square footage that should be achievable, actually quite interesting. And it can go into buildings. It has this whole indoor touch, which is really, really great, especially for countries in the Middle East or in warmer areas. So there's very little reasons why it's not really doing well. And that's actually always the way we approach it, is not like saying like, what is the current state? It's like, what is the state where it could be, given the attractiveness of the sport, the current time. Everybody's looking for short, intense, competition-driven, high intensity activities, and squash basically checks all these boxes. So it's like, it's actually set up for success if you look at how our attention span, mindset, and everything nowadays work. It's just not there yet, which obviously has to do with a lot of missing out on the late 80s and 90s, like where a couple of decisions were just overslept, or I don't know the English word. It was like people were just like not realizing and just continuing. So I think there is a lot of great potential to bring the sport back on a much, much larger scale. And luckily enough, the Squash Summit was actually an important part to also visualize that finally, because we already see that the last 1.5, 2 years, there is a lot of traction, like of people coming up with cool new concepts, like completely, like if you would talk like in Europe, if you said like, I'm going to open up a squash center, people were like, that's still around. And now we see like super cool people like Squash Arena Suzy. They're like, we're building a new squash center from scratch. And they're not squash players. They're like people who found the sport, liked it, and then decided to open up a center. They're not the ex-player who played it in the 90s and then still kept the center until now. So there's a lot of new models, new mindset, and especially now also with the larger federations and organizations slowly going like, hey, maybe we need to move a little bit. And I think it's slowly taking shape for a new height.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that you, as a non-squash player, came in and you've seen an opportunity, right? You could have, presumably, a fun with balls concept, could be applicable to multiple different sports. I know you rely on the front wall, but you could have chosen any sport fundamentally, and you chose squash. So I guess that's pretty encouraging in itself. And then I guess, the in-front deal with PSA, I don't know how familiar you are with that, but that's a step in the right direction. There's, as you say, there are some exciting things in the pipeline going on right now.
And also, if you, for example, we've been always in touch with Zina a lot, Zina Woodbridge from the WSF, and just watching her presentation, comparing that. I think 2017 or whatever, I was speaking at the annual WSF meetup in Marseille, and people were like, literally, okay, that crazy guy. And now you see that a lot of because not everything, one thing that we always say is like, we are obviously, yes, we're interactive squash. We're trying to promote the system and we're trying to show why the system is great, but it only works if we're able to elevate the whole ecosystem. This is why we do a lot of, it's not just we sell you the system, we encourage you to train a little bit more how you actually address your clients, to widen your offering to other people, like all these things. And a lot of these things where we've been saying like, hey, come on guys, you need to wake up, you need to be looking more to the left and right and realize it is a product. You want to have people's lifetime. Like, you want to have people spend their time being part of your community, playing your sport. You need to realize that you're in crazy competition with Netflix, with everything. And slowly, even WSF and whatever, you realize like, okay, cool. You're slowly getting the ecosystem where you're in, because a little bit what always was the problem is like squash always had a slightly arrogant touch, not like the whole white shirt thing, but towards the world. And this is always with niche sports. They always think like the problem is not with us, it's with the world, that they have to realize that we're great. And this is nowadays not the way that things work. Like, you can't run Netflix and say like, hey, we have a bad offering and we don't have enough subscribers, but they just need to realize that we have a really good offering. They're all wrong.
Yeah.
You need to change your offering.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's talk about where you think the sport is excelling at the moment. I mean, where do you think the good things are in the game?
Well, I mean, one thing that I always find, which is something that's very, very worth pointing out, the PSA is doing a great job already. And even if you look at where they want to go, which is obviously always hard, like there's always this is what we want to do, and this is what we actually can do right now. But they're taking the right steps. They're going in very, very interesting and very, very good directions. In front is just one of them. The whole visualizing part of showing the sport has improved a lot. I mean, you probably saw the little videos that we did with like this is squash, like the funny stuff, and this is always a very simple example, because a lot of times I always bring people, when I go to the PSA events, which is mostly business for me, I always bring complete outsiders, like people who never played squash, who never watched a squash match, and I just bring them to see this is the event format. Obviously, compared with other events, they're like, okay, that's all. But once they see a cool match, like two really good players competing on a high level, everybody's that I've brought is always like, what's going on there? Like, this is like, wow, like these guys are killing it. Like, look at them, he's jumping over there. Like the action is so amazing. And the PSA is slowly evolving to a way of framing it better and better, especially with Squash TV. So I think that's something that's really worth looking at. We just have to package it nicer. We just have to have a cool event concept around it, so we actually get people in that are not the hardcore squash fans. Slowly, I also see that the sort of arrogance of people having like just casual players coming in is it's softening a lot. Right. We remember the first time we installed our system in a test court, people were like, yeah, but we don't want to have people here that don't play squash. It's like they're gonna like just wiggle around, look at that swing, and look like, but they had fun, and they paid for the court, and they bought the rackets, and that's something that I think is no sports in the world has the right to say like, we don't want to have new people. It's like, no, you need to embrace those people. This is the people that are going to be paying your court tomorrow, and we see that there's a lot of movement towards that. On a very, very grassroots level at the same time.
And presumably interactive squash is helping that, right? And lowering that barrier to entry and making it fun, right?
I mean, it's not just lowering that. That's like sometimes even it's a little bit too much of an injection for some people, because this is so in the beginning, people bought the court and they were like, yeah, but we want to use it for squash. And we said, no, you should also like even like children's birthday parties, and people are like, children's birthday parties, this is a squash center, we're gonna like, I don't want to have children here. And now slowly, now it's even going in the other direction. We have some owners of interactive squash courts and like, no, we're only gonna do children's birthday parties and this and that, we're gonna have the soccer club over, and no, you can't book it for squash because no, we're gonna earn so much more money. We're like, guys, please don't move all. So and obviously not everybody of these is going to be an avid squash player for the next 35 years, and they're not all going to become pros or whatever. But from that 100% that we bring in extra, like 20-30%, a very simple, cool thing is like, you throw kids in there, some kid at some point is going to look around, is going to realize they can be much faster if they have a racket. We give them like softballs in the beginning. At some point, they're just going to go to the cashier or to the receptionist, like, give me a racket. I need to win this game. It's like, and people are like, oh, cool. Kids want to have rackets again. And it's a much more intrinsic approach. And that's maybe the problem with squash. You always thought that you have to force people to play squash and children are going to like it once they play it a couple of times, and the IOC has to realize that this is our right and whatever. It doesn't work that way. You have to motivate people to actually come to you, not push it to them.
So you must have done a ton of research around all of this, and obviously you're selling interactive squash courts to clubs and saying this is a great way to bring people into the sport. But from your conversations with the different stakeholders and different people within the sport, what do you think are traditionally the biggest barriers to entering the sport? What are the biggest challenges we face in bringing new people to the sport, whether that be beginners, adults or juniors? What do you see the issues that we are facing and come up against?
Very good point. I mean, the first one is like accessibility. There's not many squash clubs around, and even especially in the UK, you don't just walk up to a squash court and like, hey, we have an afternoon, can we play? People are going to be like, who are you? Like, go away. No, you need to sign up first. And can you even play? Like where did you play before? Which needs completely changed. Like, you want to try, we're going to find ways. We're going to give you bigger rackets for kids. We're going to give you softballs or whatever. Like, just get on the court, because as soon as you spend time on the court, you're basically in that community. And then we can start building you. And like we always say, sometimes they start with pickleball rackets and like super soft foam balls, because you need to get them in. Second part, obviously, is it's not a sport that's really hard to learn if you compare it with other sports. But then don't forget, most of the other sports are suffering as well. Tennis has the same problem, just by a delay of 5-6 years. You have to compare the activity of learning a sport nowadays with downloading an app and playing Fortnite, with flying a drone. I can buy a drone right now for $200. I make a 3-minute tutorial on my phone, and I can fly that thing through the forest and whatever. I can do really, really cool stuff. And that's what you actually need to approach. So basically the way that our brain nowadays is used to getting its endorphins and like, hey, you're doing great, or like all these elements are now running on a completely different time and intensity scale than they used to do like 25 years ago. You now have a Saturday where have free lessons. 25 years ago, that was like, cool, I'm going to learn something, you're going to work. Nowadays, that's not interesting. You need to package it in a way that people say that can compete with a trampoline park, that can compete with whatever, riding my e-bike up and down the mountains without any effort, without having to train. So making sure that people have the access to try, and then having a good map to actually, okay, what's the first lesson like? What's the second? Why do you come back the third time? How do I start this thing? Or this becomes more and more fun the longer you do it. You need some tricks for that. Gamification, not just with interactive squash, but just general gamification, is a game changer for that, because it just basically works with the Olympic system to just always keep you like entertained. And I think that's also the biggest part where you lose the people again, because we saw when we did the research, we saw a lot of people, I tried squash once. And then they always said, yeah, it was kind of fun, but why did you never do it again? It's not because squash is bad, it's because everything else was so much easier, more fun, more accessible, or whatever.
Yeah.
So you got to keep the brain hooked all the time until you reach the point where like, I've been doing this 2 years and now I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. It's fascinating stuff, and a whole new level of insight that I think many stakeholders in the sport won't actually have started processing yet, right?
But that's always the nature of things. This is because you're in that community already. You're like, I think there's a certain level where your brain established something, which is like, hey, you're an ex-pro. Hey, of course you're always going to play sport. Nowadays, the sequential like hobbies and whatever is omnipresent. Like, you do something like that for like 2 years, then you do something like that for 3 years. Oh yeah, I used to do that a couple of years back. So in order to win that game, you need to have a constant impulse. It's the same way if you watch a movie nowadays. If there's 5 bad cuts and the movie's boring for 1.5 minutes,
yeah,
you're gone. Then I'm gonna open my phone and I'm gonna check my status, and oh yeah, there's
Yeah.
You got to be, that's something you have to deal with.
Yeah, totally. So in terms of kind of some of the resistance, I guess I'm sure you have come up with some resistance around installing installing courts.
A lot.
Yeah, talk to me about that, and what's the typical resistance from various stakeholders at different levels of the sport, and what are you actually dealing with? What do you find yourself kind of constantly coming up against?
I mean, there's a couple of different ones, and we can go through the top ones. I mean, every system always have a certain immune response once something new happens, and we've been anticipating that. And when we started, we were like, okay, a lot of people that won't like that. Funnily enough, this is how the title for the company behind Interactive Squash was born, because Fun with Balls, everybody always thinks like, oh yeah, that's such a nice name, and do you know that? No, we literally said like, we gotta have some really, really, really big balls if we want to go in and fight these stereotypes, and like, like we know we need to go through for like 4 years before people are like, yeah, you're actually right. So that's what we said. Okay, we're gonna call it Fun with Balls. But I mean, there's the people that are old and that say, okay, it's just annoying. Like, we don't want to be confronted with technology here, because this was some people is like, this is my safe haven. This is where I'm still appreciated. Like, like, this is no tech area, and I'm 55 now. I used to be a big squash player. I come here every 2 weeks, and this is still where I'm the star. And now you're bringing these young kids and you're telling them they're the star because they're doing something I don't fully understand, and it's cool. So all these things obviously always come with a lot of ego. The price point for interactive squash, especially in the beginning, I mean, we started selling it at 33K for the hardware, and that's just our own cost of building the stuff. Like, it's not even that we're making money on the hardware. People said it's impossible to even make money with that. By now, we've obviously proven a lot of people wrong. We still know it's a big investment. We're now stepping down the prices as the more units we produce, the cheaper we can produce. And that was a great learning I think for a lot of people, because when you come in and you say, no, obviously, yes, you can make 15 to 20 grand profits with a squash court per year, people are like, you're insane. You're trying to trick me into something or whatever. Same thing there. We had to hold through and just like, okay, let the numbers speak, prove them wrong. Yeah, and then there's obviously the whole thing that's technology. I think there's very little things that are that polarizing nowadays than technology. Everybody uses it. Everybody knows it. Unfortunately, everybody knows there's only one direction to go. Like, it's evolution, things are going to get more connected. There will never be, we're not going to turn around and say, I'm going to throw away my phone now. I'm not going to be reachable. I'm just going to write letters. But people dislike that because it gives them a certain feeling of not being in control. And technology now also going into very traditional or very offline activities is something where people are like, why do you also need to put a screen there now? My kids are already working with screens or playing with screens all day. But then this is our philosophy. Is like, I'd rather have somebody engage physically on a screen instead of saying like, I'm just going to accept that you're going to be standing like this for like 12 hours a day. So yeah, and then obviously the whole the other point was, most of the people who realized that this is going to be a game changer, I've never spoken about this much in interviews, to be honest, then realized that they want to be part of it, or they like, we the first couple of months, we've been probably approached by 50 people who told us, I'm the guy in the squash world. If you want to make it big in the squash world, you need to work with me. Only give me 10% of your company, or you only have to pay me like $5 grand a month, or you only have to do, and I'll make sure, because otherwise you are going to fail. And we've been lucky enough to realize that from the very early beginning, we're like, we're not gonna have exclusivity. It's like, everybody who wants to buy a court can buy a court. And we've always been like, there's a lot of politics in squash around the world. It's insane. It's like a big daily soap of also amazing characters, but also some really, like, some of the stuff we were literally sitting here in our strategy meetings like, so what's the guy's problem? We don't know, but he says we can only do it with him, but nobody, like, it's like so many layers of, yeah, but I know that story from back in the 80s. That guy does like this guy because he did that, but he's friends with that. Like, yeah, it's fun, but
it has its challenges.
it has its challenges, and we've always been trying to be like, you play Switzerland and go like, we're not involved, like
Yeah.
you guys, like we're not picking sides, because everybody wants you to pick sides. Everybody's like, yeah, I heard that you're working with this guy, so are you with them or with us? No, we're just selling a system to get people on courts. It's like, yeah, but if you install with this guy, then we're not gonna. I'm like, I don't want to be involved in this. It's like, just we build technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, well, you're completely right, and I'm sure we've come up against some of the similar challenges over the past 10, 12 years. But talk to me about your understanding of other sports, because there are some other sports out there that are clearly excelling at the moment. The ones I keep coming back to at the moment are kind of paddle and pickleball. What's your understanding about where those sports are at? What are they doing well? What are they doing we're not doing? What can we kind of learn from them at this stage? Interested to.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, you can always divide it in a couple of different points. The one is the very simple physical and mostly financial element to it. If you very simple like paddle, well, perfect. Tennis is going down. You can turn 2 tennis courts into 1 paddle board, 2 paddle courts. It's easier to learn. It looks cooler and has a better image, so you're going to make more money. That's the one thing. Image, coolness, the whole organizational structure of how you portray something nowadays becomes so much more important. This is why I believe one of the biggest differentiators or deciding factors is how well the PSA can actually portray the pro world, not just by this is a squash match, but also who are the characters? Why do we find they're cool? This is why we did the This Is Squash thing, because we wanted to show like, look, this is really cool matches, but that's only like 20-30%. All the rest is like cool people. They're having fun. They're a great community, and it's like, hey, why don't you participate? And that is what paddle does really well. It's cool, engaging. If you go on TikTok and you check out paddle, it looks cool. Everybody, I would like to play it. It's like, if you've never seen it, you would like go up to your wife or whatever. It's like, hey, honey, that's something we should try. It looks fun. And that's a little bit what we still need to tickle out in terms of the squash world, because it still has this, oh yeah, elitist touch. It still has this way too focused, like this is a match. No, show me the bloopers, show me who are these people, why are they cool, like why do I like them. It's not just, okay, this is a world champion in squash. It's like, okay, that's his status, show me his persona. And the other thing is what these companies or organizations do really well, and this is something that squash has to learn, is they're really, really, really well in execution on a short time frame. Like, they trial and error a lot. If you look at the paddle, they also tried stuff which absolutely doesn't work, and then they rebuy. They basically have a startup mentality, and they get stuff done. Because nowadays, there's also a book wrote a whole book about stuff like that, and the whole federations and sponsors is a very important part. The ability to implement changes fast is a very, very, very deciding factor of how can you actually adapt to a changing consumer preference. Like, for example, in tennis, they take 3 years to decide a rule change to make the game a little faster. In these 3 years, consumer preference change completely around. It might be something else. They might say, no, we want you to wear neon clothes and play in the dark. If you can trial and error that quick, you can narrow down to be as close as you can want to the target audience that you're addressing. So, for example, best of 5 is a good example. It took very long. Yes, best of 5 is much more. I would go best of 5 plus an extra whatever. Let's have a sudden death mode. Let's try it out if we can. It might
lean methodology or agile methodology to a sport, right? And
exactly,
I've 100% come up against the same frustrations. And federations are naturally slow moving, right? And boards and committees.
Exactly.
It's a challenge we face as a sport, and I think it that happens at a national level all the way down to a club level. Committees
Absolutely.
are challenging, and you just want people making decisions quickly. And as you say, let's trial, let's fail fast. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We'll learn from it and we'll move on. But people,
and the PSA, for example, is a great example for that.
Yeah,
like we've done the first time we put up a interactive squash court in Sweden. I mean, it worked, but it was that close to terribly failing. Like literally, I had to sit in the train and drive to a place 500 or 400 kilometers away to get like some adapter because one crashed, and the court was not perfect. Like it was like so many. But in the end, you remember that one article Nathan Clark wrote, where we had the first stats, and he compared a match between Tarek and I don't know to the most intense tennis match, and it was like eye opening. And it's like yes, we could have like made decisions for 2 years, but this was like 4 weeks before the event. It was like, come on, let's do it. And I was like, okay. And federations are naturally, that's a challenge of the time. They're normally there to preserve.
Yeah.
If they don't reinvent that, why are they there? So they need to change, because just preserving is not relevant anymore.
No, 100%. It's something has to give now, especially, we can't just go back to the way things were. This is, we're faced with an opportunity now, aren't we? In this post-COVID world, we've all had time to think, and we've had time to take stock. And, I'm excited to see what actually comes of this when we come back, who has changed, who is bringing something different to the party. And it's going to be a challenge. But I mean, in your mind then, what do we need to do collectively? And, I guess at different levels of the sport, but how do you see us injecting more life into the sport? Where are the kind of quick wins? Obviously we will say we have our own invested interest. We say, well, everybody should adopt an interactive squash court. And I should say everyone, signs up to Squash Skills, or everyone signs up to Squash Levels, and we'll be away. But I guess, more kind of grassroots, or what can clubs be doing? What the other kind of obvious wins to you to make the sport more accessible?
It's actually,
things bounce back.
It's frightening how simple it is. And yes, we can, all these things are right. But if you take the very, very tip of the pyramid, like what needs to be, for us, it's always like in our startup, everything we do follows a certain guiding principle. So we say, now we want to make the back end stronger, and we want to enable clubs to have more control over the audiences that they address. So then you basically make a little like organigram, and you really try to, does this all follow the one thing that we're trying to do? And the one thing that we now need to do is realize of one very, 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 very simple thing. Your target audience is not a squash player. For everybody. For a club, it's not the squash player. For the WSF, it's not the squash player. Even for Squash Skills, it shouldn't be the squash player. That's your daily work, but you already do that really, really well. Your effort should go into the people who are not playing squash. Same way that we address, if you look at interactive squash, yes, we have the training skills, we have the heat maps. Do we advertise that? No, because the squash players know. They know that they get super amazing training routines. So if you look at our social channels, what are we addressing? This is fun, you should try squash. The WSF should not be made for the squash players. That's the standard stuff. They should be able to do that automatically. Otherwise they wouldn't be in the position. Like, you got to do your job. But what you should be focused on is addressing not the 25 million, if it's even 25 million squash players, telling them you should play squash more often. You need to address the rest 6.5 billion people who never held a squash racket. Like, how do we get them into a squash court? That's the only thing. All the rest, basically, that's simple stuff that follows up. That's not where we need to have the crazy eureka moment. This is just like, then you just do your job. So once they say like, hey, we want to play and we want to learn how to, where do we get more coaches? Well, if you have 200 people lined up for lessons, you know what? Finding a coach and paying him well and making lessons is going to be a very, very easy job. That's just the follow-up.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And to me, there's an area that hasn't been addressed well enough is the kind of the beginner adult. I think we've missed that target. How do we make it appealing to university students or people who've come out of university? And
The top golf people, like there's actually UK is really, really far in that. It's called uh, uh, competitive socializing. There's even a term for it. And that goes for anything for like we have a bar with a ping pong table to there's this X throwing venue. And obviously people just want to try stuff like that. But it needs to be attractive. You need to add one thing that we noticed with interactive squash, a lot of like groups in the late evenings like to book an interactive squash court. Four dudes, they drink a beer and whatever, and they go on, take turns, and they just, have some fun. And it ends up being this 3 hour fun play session. But you know what? They all did their sport. They all bought the racket. They all rented the shoes or whatever, and they rented the court for 3 hours from like 9 o'clock till 12 at night.
Yeah.
And that's fun. And some people might be, oh, that's not squash. It's like, it doesn't matter.
That's what you said. It's getting people into the venue is half the battle, right? And
it's 90%.
Yeah, you're right.
The rest is just logical and smart follow-up. Well, once they're in, well, you gotta give them good beverages, food. Your changing rooms need to be appealing and clean. But that's not like, oh my God. It's like, hey, come on, just follow up.
What's your take on, having been in it for kind of 5-6 years, but what's your take on the social element around squash and the social scene around squash? How do you see it? Because I remember when I was 8, 9, 10, going down to Newport Squash Club, was the big successful squash club in South Wales. And I remember going to watch the number ones play. It was David Evans playing my coach at the time, a guy called Gareth Edwards, who was Welsh number 10. And the gallery was so packed that I was having to crouch down between the bars just to try and get a glimpse of this. This was a Thursday night, local league, but 40, 50 people just crowded onto this balcony watching this. And it was just, Squash Club was a wonderfully vibrant, exciting place to be. And I mean, the last time I went to Newport, there was nobody there. And the social element was, there were literally 5 players from each team, and that was it. And there's been I don't know, it feels like there's been a shift. And obviously there are some clubs that are being successful, but what's your take on the social side of the sport, and how important is it? How and what do we do to rejuvenate that part of it? Because ultimately I feel like you want to play squash, and then we want people coming off and having a beer and spending some money behind the bar or having some food, and then having some good music on in the background, and people just enjoying that club environment. It feels so crucial to me to it's not just about the money spent on sport, is it?
No, it is about the experience. But to be honest, I tried to look into this, and I haven't made up my mind yet what I really think will happen. I mean, in the early days, or in the like 10, 15, 20 years ago, that was a massive part. And I think there is still part of that is appealing, and that might come back in some little niches. Just generally, obviously, nowadays consumer preferences are changing insanely. Like even just aligning to getting 10 people at the same spot with the way that we basically plan our free time. And no, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and then I have everything on demand, and I don't feel like it today, I'm going to cancel. I think the whole thing, there is some magic in it, but I think the way that the consumer actually will create this will drastically change to a very non-linear way. So it might not be that you're going to have these events where there's 100 people around at the venue every Thursday. You will have a cool meeting point, and it will become like a cool, like being physically there is a very, very big commitment nowadays. Just physically going to a space nowadays, you have to imagine, like we're moving to a way where this is what Corona also brought. Like, why do you even physically have to go there? Well, because you have a physical interaction. I don't need to go there to write an email. But hey, I need a squash court. So it will be some kind of meeting point, and it needs to be appealing, and it needs to be inviting enough to actually spend some more time that, and maybe even use a sunbed or go to the sauna or whatever, and you might meet people. I'm just not fully sure if I mean, we decided to make the e-squash league just before Corona hit, so then we postponed it. Same thing. We said, okay, if you're running a tournament, you can basically run a tournament, because when we spoke with, for example, M Squash, they said it's really hard for people to even come for 3 hours. Like when they drop off their kids, they drop them off and they know at quarter after 3, I'm going to pick you up again because you need to go to whatever lesson. So we said, okay, can we take a tournament and completely make it decentralized? Like you don't need referees, you don't need somebody organizing and running around with a list and telling people. It's like, can we just all do it with an app? Like you're participating in a tournament, but it's only going to take you 1.5 hours of your time today. You might get the results while you're sitting in front of your fireplace in the evening. It's like, okay, cool, we're going to find out, okay, oh, they just won. Because generally that's a little bit more the direction where we're moving. I might be wrong.
No, it's
we
fascinating.
might.
I mean, if I think back to the amount of time my parents gave up for me to drive me around squash clubs as a junior to, go and play, possibly on a Friday night, 2 matches Saturday, 2 days Sunday, this whole weekend, this whole commitment.
Exactly.
And, you don't get me wrong, you have to do that if you want to be committed to a sport. And, if we weren't that committed, then this whole life that I've led wouldn't have happened. There was a commitment, but the notion that everybody is prepared to give up whole weekends, work really hard, and then go and hang around a squash club and play 4 or 5 matches over the course of the weekend is, it's a challenge, isn't it?
One thing that always helps is try to move, like when you're trying to get, we always call it the outside view. This is like in our startup, it's like always everything needs to be focused on the outside view. If you're selling something, don't try to sell your product. Think of what is the outside view. Take away squash, forget squash. Tell me, when was the last time, not squash, where you spent a full day for an activity from morning to evening without doing anything else, without saying like, okay, cool, now I'm just going to hide over there for 2 hours, going to do my Zoom calls, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go have some coffee. No, just you went to one place, no matter what, a shop or whatever, and you spent the whole day there doing one activity.
I'm kind of unique in the sense in that I love my fly fishing. So mine wouldn't have been that long ago, fly fishing in Mexico in December.
But like a full day.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I can do it on fly fishing. I can go out and sit in a boat for 13 hours. That's my.
Oh yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I can do the same with surfing, like until I drop. But if you take that, I mean, that also has a little bit of a meditational, like alone time thing. But involve 10 other people or 50 other people. I mean, we live in Munich, and we're obviously very close with soccer clubs and whatever, and we talk with FIFA. And FIFA actually told us, you know what? We even have problems nowadays handing out free tickets to finals of big important games, because even the free tickets, like something that was like 10, 15 years ago, people would rip off their arm to get one of those. Nowadays, you give that to a CEO of a company, and he's like, Saturday in Munich. Might want to give that to somebody else. I don't know if I'm gonna, like, I have to drive there, I have to get a hotel, then get into the bus, drive to the place, and then watch the 2 hours. I'm just gonna watch it at home. It's much more fun.
So, and this is all down to you saying from on-demand culture. And that this
attention span, I would say. The on-demand culture, I think, is the result of that, and also a different thing that's developing. But I think we're just used so much more that, is it important enough? If it's not like the top of our priority list, you drift off. There's an alternative. There's something else. I want to go to that restaurant.
But it comes back to, squash should satisfy that need in the context of a sport. In 40, we come back to 40-minute workout, and it's competitive. It's still a fantastic game. It is, it is short and sharp, but it's getting people onto the court. It's opening.
Exactly, the packaging, and that's what I mean. Like from the sheer basics. It is actually the perfect, or it is a very, very good product. It's like, it fits everything, just the whole thing around. that needs to optimize, like the getting there, the ambiance, like the product, how friendly are the people when I walk in. If they're not friendly, you know what, I'm not going to come again. Normally the other day it was like, you would go to a place and like, yeah, they're always grumpy. You would go to the restaurant and say, yeah, they have service but they have good food. Nowadays, like, I'm not going to come here again. Like,
yeah,
our compromise will to compromise is getting really, really thin.
yeah.
You might now complain about this, and this is also what I write in my book, is like, I don't say that's a good thing, but you have to accept it. Like, it will not change just because you dislike it.
No, for sure. So where does the responsibility sit, in your opinion, for making these changes?
Well, that's a tricky part. That's a tricky part because it sits with everybody. It's like, how do you change a political system? You don't change a political system by just saying, like, well, that party should say this. No, you got to have the people, you got to have the coaches, you got to have the facilities, you got to have everybody. Like, and this is a little bit like, it has to be this community driven feeling to, if everybody at least have that's important thing. Not everybody needs to be driving this, but everybody needs to have a feeling of there could be something nice. This is how revolutions are started. Revolutions are not started by, oh, then these people did that and everybody followed. It's like, no, everybody thinks like, okay, there's something brighter on the horizon. I'm probably just going to say, well, I like it, and that's already my part. I'm probably even going to say I don't dislike it. But as soon as people embrace this and all stand up and all do their very, very little part, you can create a little bit of a shift. You have to shorten processes. You have to, like, there's so many elements to it. And the funny thing is, in all these 5 years, I've met people that dislike us. I've met people who like everything, but I've never met a single person who's not aspiring to this could be more.
Yeah.
Everybody, like every single person is like, no matter, even if they say it out of the, like, we should be in the Olympics because we deserve it. But never somebody was like, no, it's fine, let's just stay here. It's like, no, everybody's like, yeah,
Yeah.
So you just have to work for it.
So I've got a couple more questions before we let you go. One is around finances. What, you have a high-end product, and you've obviously, come up against financial barriers. But I'm interested to hear your take on the kind of financial position of the sport and the way squash players view the sport. And obviously you've got absolute, huge amounts of wealth in the States, and people prepared to pay vast sums of money for coaching and to play their sport. And then in other parts of the world, people are reluctant to put their hand in a pocket to pay for a 50p increase in their court fees, or whatever it is. But what's your take and your experience as within the squash world from a kind of financial standpoint? Take on what we need to do.
It is obviously vastly different all around the world. One thing that I always, and this is something that I've been quoted for a lot of times, and some people always get it wrong, is like, I always think if you want to make something really successful and sustainable, you need to create a good business model around it. Like, if you want to increase coaching, you need to make sure that your coaches that it's not a non-for-profit and, hey, come on, please do it for free and No, you need to make sure that they get a reasonable amount of money for that and they can sustain a living. And if you decide to be only a coach, you need to be still able to afford a nice rent and maybe a car and blah blah blah, and not be like, hey, I'm giving up myself and I'm gonna die poor, but I taught a million people how to play a great sport. So you need to be able to put it there. The one thing that I always obviously see, everything in life is expensive, but there's very, very good financial models to actually cope with that. And if you look at most of even the centers where you say like, okay, they're not willing to pay 50 pence extra, if you give them the right framework and the right idea and the right product and the right frame for it, the amount of money that you can actually raise is surprising. I mean, it's the same thing, and it's always so funny because everybody always says, yeah, the squash court is so expensive and blah blah blah. we face exactly the same thing. We're a startup. When we started the company, we said we're going to start with squash to like develop our technology. Everybody laughed at us. Like we had no investment, and we literally had to go like, I don't know how many hundred people we by now been in contact with to fund us and actually bet their money onto like this is going to become a big thing. But it somehow worked, and the only way that it worked is we just had to put in a lot of extra effort to be able to finance what we believe in. If you're just going for like, oh, it's going to be expensive, I'm not going to do anything about it, well, you're probably not going to change your position. But if you really know what you're fighting for, and we have some centers that went from like, oh, hey, we're booking out the courts 1-2 hours per day and average over the year, blah blah blah, and it's a rundown place, and it's 50 or 50 plus average age, to like places that are thriving, where like local state schools are now hiring their court to do their sports lessons because they realize that the kids in their own gym, like in their own sports facility, are not triggered by like running around little paper huts, plastic cups. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to go over, we're going to take a bus, we're going to drive there for 10 minutes, and we're going to go into your squash court because the kids love that. And that's what it takes. Like the hard things are hard because they're not easy. So there's always a way. We just received, like probably tomorrow or the day after, a message is going to go out, the first interactive squash court in a African country. If I tell you the name of the African country, you're going to be, what? Like it's literally like we have some places in the UK like, this is way too expensive, and then we put it there, and they like got the money together, got a loan, some people pitched in, and they found a way. Obviously, they also took care of the Squash Summit special deal that we now had, because they've been thinking for it for a long time, and then they said, okay, now we want to have one. There's always a way. And just, I know it's hard. And I mean, we come from Germany. The Germans are very stingy and very like, not stingy, but very careful with money. If you compare it to other things in our daily life, and you just put the value and the invest and the value or the effect side by side, it's like you're talking to the one center. It's like, oh, 30,000 euros is so expensive. Wait, you have 2 cars for the centers. Like they're 40,000 euros each. How much do these cars get you? Well, we go shop for groceries. Yeah, but why do you need that car? Like this car is not going to create 500 kids every year playing the sport.
Yep.
It's just going to shipping your groceries. It's like it brings a carton full of milk from the supermarket here. That's what you invested 40K for.
Yeah.
Like,
so what I'm hearing is that fundamentally there needs to be a bit more of a mind shift, doesn't there, within the sport, a bit more open-mindedness. Like there are people doing great things in the sport. We know that. We saw that at the Squash Summit. And then definitely, I mean, Richard's talk was all about collaboration and, bringing the best in class companies together. And I think, there's a lot to be said for that. And everything is an interconnected world, right? There's plenty of opportunity to pull this data together. And, if we're each focusing on our own niches and playing to our strengths, we can do fantastic things. But I think we do need that open-mindedness and a bit more speed, perhaps. We just, the
break some things
could just do with coming along a little bit quicker. But yeah, I think that is a challenge we need to overcome. So hit me.
But the good thing is always to understand that's a challenge right now for everybody.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit of a nice feeling, because it always is like, it might feel sometimes like, oh my God, it's the same like with Corona. Everybody feels like, yeah, Corona is so bad. Well, the whole world, it's the same thing for everybody.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, there is a chance to bounce back. Zina, we've got a new president in with WSF, got the in-front deal. I know there's a few companies with some new things ready to roll out. It is an exciting time. So hit me with your one reason, or it could be a couple of reasons, but let me know why we should be optimistic about the next little period as a squash community. What should we be optimistic about?
We should be optimistic but ready to work. That's and this is like a little bit of, I think big changes always require a lot of sweat. That's definitely one thing that we have to, when we talk about this, not only say like, oh, we're all going to get there. Yes, we're going to get there somehow, but not if you don't get, we had for example, we had a couple of distributors, and what we do is like, once you start selling interactive squash in a country, you're not exclusive until we only have one country right now where it's exclusive. It's the Netherlands, because they sell a lot of them. If I want to sell a lot of interactive squash courts, I can't be in the mental state of in 5 years when it's going to be big, because it's going to lead to me not working my ass off today to actually make that happen. Yeah. So that's the one thing that I would really say, like, we need to put in all the work today to actually have fruit tomorrow. We can't just say, oh, the fruits are going to come tomorrow. I would be very, very, very optimistic, because it is a great sport. The match between where people are heading, if we get this right, it's going to be very easy to create a very, very, very cool new, I wouldn't call it hype, because hype always has this feeling of it's just a hype. No, it's like growth. It's sustainable growth. We still have so many courts around. They're slowly closing here and there. So if we can reverse that, it's actually a pretty good groundwork for building something really, really, really amazing. Just got to build it.
So cool. Well, I mean, that's been a truly fascinating chat. It's always great to speak to you. Always good to sense that enthusiasm coming through the screen.
Same with you guys. I mean, we love your stuff, and you already, I mean, you also are a great example of, and coming back to the one thing that I really, really think is if I watch Squash Skills video, the image is something completely different than the real world of a normal squash lesson, for example, right now. That's already the first start. If I've never had a touch point with squash and I watch your squash video, that looks cool. It's clean, bright courts, nice people that talk with me in a nice
great
thing.
Mustache.
And, you know, like, great mustaches. That's the most important part. And that's what you want to show people. And then they're like, hey, cool, I want to try that too. That's all. It's not that. It's pretty simple. Do something cool and show it to people.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll be doing plenty more together, but as ever, I massively appreciate your time. I'm sure everybody else does at home. So thank you, Markos, and we will be in touch.
Thank you so much, and very, very much keep this up, and can't wait to see more people follow me and discuss exactly these topics.
Thank you.